Good morning to all of you. It's indeed very nice to be here. And it's quite interesting to actually know so many things that's happening within type, the two extremes. So as you all know, I'm from Sri Lanka, and as well, I'm a researcher on the subject. So my presentation or my research is focused on the anatomy of the Sinhala letter. This is purely inspired by Girish's work from the anatomy of the Devanagari script. So what I actually would want to say here is we come here and we talk about a lot of typefaces, type design, and more specifically into Indic script as well. So in the morning when we were listening, it was quite interesting where we have gone to an extreme, and whereas I'm here trying to tell you about the anatomy of the Sinhala letter, which is again like in the primary stage. But then again, I guess this is the place where we all meet. So where theory actually meets practice. As I told you, Typo Day had been a very, very nice experience for me, and learning about scripts, because yesterday the workshops actually helped me to figure out how many the different types of fonts existing and how do you actually put things into order. So within this group, I'm sure there are people who are actually planning to design or already designing Sinhala fonts or maybe other Indic scripts. So my research is actually for people who are in, well, anybody, wherever it matters, y'all can learn from it. It's mainly on, in generally, my search is on typography, but more specifically into the script itself. So I would like to quote Girish here again, because he defines anatomy of the Sinhala, or anatomy of a letter as being a vocabulary used to describe parts of a letter, its structural system, that makes up the morphological characteristics of a certain typeface. So here, what is important is two areas. That is the literature survey on the, the definition, what I took from the definition is the vocabulary and parts of a letter. So when you don't know where, and you're designing something and you don't know what to do, like I'm sure there are most of you, when you're designing typefaces, you think of that moment, or you just show a part of a letter and say, what is that piece, the part of the cur or part of the n. So whereas if I want to establish something within the subject of typography, we need to have a very well, a good standardized vocabulary, so at least for it to go further. But the thing is, we don't have literature. That is the biggest issue that I came up with. So I want to, my search is on how I actually went into a literature survey and a cross-analysis, and most importantly, figured out that there were visual forms with existing terminology and non-existing. It's quite funny because how do you if it's non-existing, it's how do you define it? So the letter itself, the question was what makes the letter, what makes the Sinhala letter. So initially, if you look at linguistic, we break it into two. We have vowels and consonants. So just because you know the letters, can we design it, comes in. And then we have, under typography, it's more into a very visual base, the script and literature. Those were the issues that came up with. So to observe the existing vocabulary that defines the part of the Sinhala letter and its structural system. So there is a structure already involved, system that takes into account. I took 3 experts. So one is on epigraphy, another on language, and the other is on standardization of language. Epigraphy is on the development of the script. So this is purely on literature. There was a lot of literature on this, but nobody talks about it in a typographic sense. So I've actually looked at this person, Professor P.E. Fernandez, he talks about the development of the Sinhala, from the Brahmi to now, well, at least towards the 15th century. Because by the 15th century, the Sinhala script had already established itself. Anybody who is able to recognize the alphabet today and compare it with the 15th century, it would be the same. So, and I focused on a book by him as the main source, and I went in for the next expert. Right, and then second expert is on language, who's Professor J.B. Dissanayake. So on language, there's a lot of literature happening. Language is documented with script. But then again, how do you actually pick one? So sadly, there is no literature on this subject of typography even from a language point of view, except one. This Professor J.B. Dissanayake speaks of typology, so which I have taken him as a second expert. And the third is on the standardization. So whereas today, how do we teach people to write the letter, or what are the compositions? So there was a book, I'm taking two institutes, that is the National Education Commission and the Ministry of National Language and Social Integration. So these are, whereas both books are very visual, so with the visual they talk about certain parts of the letter, so I'm looking at those, while the book on by the NEC talks about the proportions of the letter, which I personally find visual issues. But then again, it goes on. With the three experts, I studied on the Sinhala letter. The reason why the definition of the Sinhala letter is mainly into, I'm talking about all the letters, so which also would be the parts that is important for typography. So with the first expert and the literature study, I had two objectives. One is to figure out how the letter has evolved. Number two is to figure out the terminology used by him. I cannot actually compare the terminology because this is a newer version of the book, so the editors have put terms, so I'm not very well focused on the terminology, but at least the development, so that we know within the alphabet there are particular signs existing, and sometimes it doesn't make any sense and to figure out why another shape. Whereas when you know the development, it actually helps to know why a particular sign is existing. And similarly, the second expert was also on the literature survey. It's two parts again, the terms and the parts, but the gap that I filled was the fact that the epigraphic studies finishes by the 15th century, so whereas language covers the rest of it. So within this, with the visual development, I've figured out the visual form of the Sinhala letter, and I've grouped it into 5 sections. So we have letters as consonants and letters as vowels. Then we have the vowels taking medial vowel signs, which I think in Devanagari you call it matras, but we don't use the term matra within the language. And we have, within the consonants, we have the combined consonants. We don't have ligatures. And we have then, of course, the combined consonant signs. So these are the 5 divisions in a visual part. This is how it looks. So we have basically the vowels and the consonants, and then consonants as, this is the grouping. So I'm focusing on section 1 of the study, which is on the existing vocabulary. So all these parts have a specific vocabulary, which I am putting it down, and I'm comparing. The other is actually the non-existing vocabulary, which is in the second part of my study, whereas the study, there is a lot of detail into it, which I will just roughly tell you. So what I did is, first of all, I grouped into the 3 sections. I have on epigraphy, language, and standardization. And I put all the terms that are used by all these experts. It's simply like one single piece is been defined by several names. So that is being noted. And as I said, these two sections I will not be including in this study simply because there is so much of variation. So here, the vowel signs, I hope, well, most of you all know how the index scripts work. So obviously, for each vowel, you have a visual sign to it. And then obviously consonants are these I grouped accordingly. Why I'm not doing this section in this paper is simply because there is so much of variation. So I have actually already done this, whereas I've come up with nearly 26 features within the Sinhala letter. There are features that are like either duplicated and will be used, and each of them needs a term which will be discussed in a, well, hopefully another paper. And then as a result of the literature survey, I get a whole series of combined consonants, which is also not documented, whereas in the glyph set, we don't have combined consonants like specifics. But so whereas you need to know the whole process to know why this would work and why they are not. So as a result of this, this was also the fact that I was able to come up with a good list. And then we have the combined consonant signs, which is called the Yansaya, Rakarangsaya, and the Repaya. So these are actually, this is under the category of combined consonants, but it's not actually bringing two letters together. It's actually bringing parts of the letter, which I will be talking about how the terminology had come in. And so this is like the visual development of how the Yangsaya has come in, how the Rakarangsaya, which is also looking like a medial vowel sign, and of course the Repaya. Then the special signs within Sinhala was the sign Lu, which is not, it looks like a consonant, but it's not a consonant. It's actually, I figured that out because I did the evolutionary study and understood how the L had, from the Brahmi script to now, had evolved, and how the vowel sign U was being placed onto the feature. So what actually happens is the evolution shows, whereas the places marked in red is actually the U sign. And then ultimately with time, this has evolved into a shape. But whereas it doesn't right now, we are using it, but it doesn't fall into either a consonant nor a vowel, but it's a combination of both. So this falls under the special category. Now my study was focused on the analysis, the existing vocabulary. So there were, by looking at that big list of all the terms existing, I grouped them according to 3 sections. So vowels are made also in a different sense. So you have vowels, one medial vowel sign that is working, and then there are also medial vowel signs that work together to create a sound. So the grouping is as this, but I will be more visual with it. So with this, what I wanted to do is I wanted to understand how the terminology had come. Why, as a result, with the by understanding that, maybe it will help me to name the non-existing vocabulary which I'm finding, which I've already found within the second category of letters itself. We have E, and then these are the shapes that are coming in. And then the terms that is used is actually Kheti is short, and Dik is long. And then the term we use for the first sign is called the Alapilla, or Kheti Alapilla, which means short stroke. So where I'm talking about how these two terms had come in, whereas in selected vowels, the visual expressions of short and long signs are termed according to its placement. So we have either the Alapilla as the side, and then we have Ispilla as the top. It's a symbol for the sign that is on top. And then Papilla, which is obviously at the bottom, as the shape that is at the bottom. So this is the terminology. So I've identified two expressions: voice expression, because we're talking about air sound, which is a voice expression, oo sound, which is also a small addition to the shape itself, and then we have the e sound, and with that the same shape with additional marks. So we are using keti and dik, and importantly this keti and dik is also a term. There are several terms. Dirga, digu, and dik are three terms that are still used within that list. So dirga is actually deriving from Sanskrit, and digu and dik comes from the Sinhala derivation. So it's important that we actually identify, are we going to give, when we're giving terms, how is the terminology being placed? Are we going with the Sinhala combination, or Sanskrit and Sinhala combination? And just for you to know, Sinhala is also a script that is used, is one of the only scripts that is used to write Sanskrit and Pali. So that's why we have a lot of letters. So similarly, the others, that is the A sound, Iru, and Au sound, another form of visual expression where these three vowels represent the kombua in front. So kombua meaning it's actually the shape of the horn, the musical instrument, and then which is actually, they see the visual and they're using that to define it. And then we have Iru, is known as the gataya. So which gataya means knot, well, side sign with a knot. So it's a visual expression again. And then we have the Au sign, which is an expression of the shape, the G consonant. So the sign illustrates the rotated G and written next to a consonant. So we use the term Gainukitta for this, which is meaning pillar with the form of the letter G. There are, actually, when I was trying to find the origin, the origin of the Tamil word kittam means next to comes in, and whereas another introduction or definition was krutya. Krutya means function. So function of the G shape, which in Sinhala, obviously is originating from Sanskrit. And so from a semantic point of view in language has turned into as form, not as function. So form of the letter G. So just a small visual on what I just told you. So this is the kombua, caterpillar, and gynokitta. So how the shapes have actually evolved in with the shape of the vowel sign as well. Right. Then we have the letter U and U, which is when you place it onto certain letters, the papilla changes. So what actually happens here is the second expert defines this, puts it into another group called the Vak alapilla and the Khong alapilla. So here what I'm talking about is the definition coming out of Vakraya and Konaya. So with that, we see the cornea. These are all papil, signs for papil, the U sound. But difference is we have two signs to define the papilla. And this is also due to the development of the letter. So that's why we cannot have the same papilla for all the letters. So we have to have several features. And the other is, it's now very clear that all the ascending letters have a papilla, and the letters that are based on the baseline have a vakra or kongalapilla. Right, and then it's also interesting to know this is the second category on the A and the hull sign, whereas why I put this, why I took it from out of this, what I've discovered is that A and the hull sign is simply because we have the A sign already inherited in our consonants. So with that, and we are using another stroke, which is called hull. But it is also important to figure out how it had evolved, whereas with shorter letters, we had to concentrate on space. This shape had evolved. So right now we have two signs because of this. Two signs as a hull sign. So for baseline strokes and for ascending strokes, letters, we have two signs. And then these have different terms. They call it kodia, which means flag. And then the other is called the rahana, which is rope. But mind you, all these terms are not common within all the three experts. This flag and kodia and rahana term is only used by the second expert. So you can figure out how he looks at from a very visual point of view, whereas in epigraphic studies, it becomes more focused on language or the language itself. But whereas you can actually compare this with how it had evolved, whereas you're simply giving two terms which had no relevance on how it came in. And then finally, the third category, which is the A, O, and O sign, which also uses the hull sign. But here, the virama sign takes two shapes, which is as a pause sign and as a lengthening mark. So again, the second expert starts giving another term to define. So what actually has happened is they're giving terms and terms, several terms for each thing, each part, and so we have no idea where do we stop or how do we conclude. But what I wanted to find out within this, within my subject area is we need to define it, I need to define it and learn from them, because there is a variation and I cannot change it. So I need to learn from them, come up with something, and maybe be able to practice. As I said, the third group represents vowels that are made with two combinations. So we have a combo in front and a consonant at the back. So which also meaning the second category. Now, there is also the second, the first expert also uses the term called ikaraya, which means doing act, that gives the sound. So again, another term has come in, ikaraya, ekaraya, okaraya, and so on. And then another expression is identified when the second and the third gives the uspilla, and the us means high, elevated, and udu also means upper part. So which also means the same thing. So represents the hull sign having two visuals. So this is what you saw before. So we see the hull sign in the two forms, and how it's named as uspilla, and then combo in front in most all the common feature within it, and how the virama sign is placed in certain letters. So you cannot just put it on top of a consonant. There is simply a way of doing that. So we have the sign for pure consonants, hal kirima, virame, kodiya, hal pilla, rahana, al lakuna. So several terms. I've categorized it accordingly, and the expressions I spoke is also within the three experts on why they have named it. And then I have the A sign as apilla, alapilla, akaranshaya, coming as adapilla, keti adapilla, akaranshaya, and adaya, alapilla. And then we have A sign coming as dirga. As I told you, the epigraphic expert uses the Sanskrit origin, and then we have the language and the standardization experts taking the term digu and dik. And we have coming in. And then we have ispil, as I told, is coming as the top. And we also have the third expert also using the keti term all the time to simply define the voice expression of the word, of the letter. And it goes on, so there is a big list there, and that's how the comparison happened. So observation and the findings was simply, I figured out what makes the Sinhala letter, and this research only focuses on the areas that I spoke about, without the letter as a vowel and a consonant. Then I've identified the existing terminology. Third is how did the terms come in? And fourth is I came up with a list of combined consonants which is never not recorded anywhere, and which can be used in case. And these findings can definitely help with maybe coming up, concluding on at least start with the glyphs for the Sinhala, because we are still with font designing, we are always going back and forth of how many glyphs are there. So this is my study, and I hope you all will take something home with what I have done. So thank you.